And we are live. Lovely. Welcome to the channel, everybody. And I'm going to assume, because I found Booktube via the very lovely Jimmy Nuts, that most of you probably already know who he is. However, if you don't, you need to know that Jimmy is the Booktube equivalent to A Song of Ice and Fire, as I am to Realm of the Elderlings. So the fact that the lovely Jimmy has read Realm of the Elderlings and enjoyed it, and I have read A Song of Ice and Fire and really enjoyed it, I'm guessing we have a bit to talk about. But Booktube isn't your only gig. Jimmy, take it away. Where else can we find you?
Well, first off, Derry, thanks for having me. I'm so perplexed. Why was the J in my name not capitalized in the thumbnail? The D was capitalized on Derry, but Jimmy was a lowercase J.
It's the font.
Oh, okay. That's fair. No, I'm just kidding. I thought it was. I actually noticed it because I've been going away from capital letters and stuff.
Oh, okay.
It's I think it's a Zoomer thing, but like I kind of like that. I kind of like the non-formal typing out of names and stuff. Sorry.
I'm glad that pleased you. Accidentally.
Clearly, I have the Fantasy Network where I talk about books, but I also have a podcast that is co-hosted with my buddy Matt, who I'm going to have on Chatting with Nuts this week. And we run Bend the Knee, which is a Song of Ice and Fire podcast. We have a small YouTube channel, but we're really more just the audio podcast. And it's actually, numbers-wise, I think the biggest thing I do by a far margin. And then I have the Lost in Roshar podcast as well, where I talk about Stormlight Archive with my buddy Christian from Lost in Discovery, who's, in my opinion, the Alt-Shift-X of Stormlight Archive, for those who do know.
Alt-Shift-X. If you know, you know.
Yeah. But, Derry, happy birthday.
Thank you. I am the big 50 today, so yay me. I am now officially the oldest lived woman in my family line. So
really?
Yay me. Yeah, I've outlived my mum now by about 4 months. So
wow. Well,
it's a big deal that I've hit.
Clearly, we're happy you're here, but we're also happy to be able to celebrate with you on a big birthday. Very big.
It is a big birthday, and that is why I booked this for today, because talking about books is my favorite thing to do, and these are my favorite books. So who better to bring on than the man who found me Booktube? So it couldn't get any better. But
well, I'm honored.
So you should be. We mentioned before we came on, excuse me, that sorry, my voice has gone hoarse. That you're probably the Booktube best out there person for A Song of Ice and Fire. There are a lot of people in podcast land who are amazing. And yes, I'm talking about History of Westeros and Radio Westeros and, David Lightbringer and Alt-Shift-X. And there are so many in podcast land who are massive Song of Ice and Fire people. But you feel like ours. So I have to ask a couple of things. First off, I think, and I can't be sure I remember rightly, I think you came to the books after the show.
I had read part of Game of Thrones and then had watched the show. At the beginning of the show, I actually didn't like it. I kind of was like a contrarian about it because that's what I used to be like. But yeah, it was around the same time-ish, but I had read the books and then watched the show like all the way through to, I think, A Storm of Swords before I watched these. I can't really remember, to be honest with you. This is at a time in my life where I was getting hit in the head a lot. And I wasn't reading I was not like I am today, where sit down and I read for 2 hours. This is not how this worked for me back then. I was very slow.
Because you were on the road a lot and you were doing it with the wrestling.
Yes, I was. And audiobooks were big for me. But the weirdest thing is that at the beginning I did not like the show. I always liked the book, but I did not like the show. And then I had to reconcile that. A little bit like Alan. Yes. Saw something I liked, and it started to get some popularity, and
grudgingly had to accept it is actually that good.
Yeah, and then I kind of, I accepted the fact that the show, in my opinion, was excellent. So, I'm really, I don't know about you. Can you separate the show and the books in your head?
I can, probably only because I've been reading them before the show. Having said that, some of the portrayals in the show are just so on the money that they completely have overtaken the images in my head. Which brings me to my second question. Why is Bobby B your favourite? What is it about the big, exuberant, very drunk man that you love so much?
He reminds me of my best friend, Andrew.
Okay.
And Andrew's actually the one who drew that. He painted that.
That is awesome.
Yeah, that's a 101. There's no other ones in the world like that. He painted it for me, and his initials are up in that white circle right about here.
Okay.
And, you know, just the life of the party, big, boisterous guy, a little bit of a temper, you know, likes whoring around. That was
into life in general.
Yes. And it always kind of reminded me of my buddy Andrew. But also the best part about Robert Baratheon is that he doesn't take himself too serious all the time. Like when Ned's like, the king's fat, you know, he's like, get the breastplate stretcher, you know, like he has a sense of humor that I generally appreciate. But Mark Addy is also just a fabulous
he is. And I'm going to take the opportunity to ask you, have you ever seen a British film called The Full Monty?
I have not.
I can highly recommend that. Mark Addy is one of the stars, and it's about a group of blokes who have all been laid off from their jobs in Northern England because it's that time of economic difficulty, and they start stripping as a job. And they're just ordinary blokes, including Mark Addy. And it is one of the funniest films I have ever seen.
It's just so funny because if you think, so I know him from Knight's Tale, right? And if you look at Knight's Tale, you would never imagine that he would play Bobby Baratheon. Because in the books, Bobby Baratheon should be like 6'8". Like he's
he should be enormous. Yeah.
A massive person.
He should be like The Rock gone to fat.
Yeah. It's like it's almost like him versus Rhaegar is very much like a David versus Goliath with David losing. And also Prince Charming, right? Rhaegar is Prince Charming, obviously.
Oh, very much so.
And dies. And that's what A Song of Ice and Fire starts off as. Like, this all kicked off because Prince Charming died.
That's right.
So, I don't know. I just think Bobby B, is funny. Everything. Mark Addy's, rendition of him is great. But, you know, if you think about it, the series isn't what it is without Bobby B. You know, that is the sticking point to, Robert's rebellion. In other fantasy stories prior to this, he wouldn't have won. Rhaegar would have won.
That's right. And that's the joy of the books, isn't it? Is that George was one of the earliest to really look at tropes and go, okay, I'm not going to bother subverting this. I'm just going to question it and take it where it normally doesn't go. And that, for me, it was something astonishing, because I did find A Song of Ice and Fire not long after I found Realm of the Elderlings, and I had a very similar experience in that they weren't very traditional fantasy stories. They weren't doing what everybody else did, although they do have quite a lot in common, which is kind of what I wanted to talk to you the most about today.
Yes.
So, I mean, as the ticker says, we'll try and keep things reasonably vague. I mean, we're talking themes and tropes and rather than specifics. So if we do spoil somebody, I'm very, very sorry. That is not the intent, but I'm also going to make the points I want to make. So it's my channel and I can.
That's right.
So for me, one of the easy first ones is the main character is in Realm of the Elderlings. You've got Fitz, who is an orphan, who is blood related to royalty. And obviously in A Song of Ice and Fire, you've got Jon Snow, who is this hidden blood of royalty. And from there, I sort of keep finding these little mirrors and echoes of the same threads. And yes, it's tropey, but both of them are doing those tropes differently to everybody else.
Yeah, and both have a sense of duty among them, for sure. And it hasn't been written yet, but I think and I'm not going to say what it is because it's very spoilery, but I think George is going to borrow a certain thing from Royal Assassin in Winds of Winter with Jon.
Yes.
I've always said
anyone who's read them both sees that parallel.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's in good spirits too, because Hobb and George are good friends and have the same
Absolutely.
editor. And I think, he pays homage a lot. He included Robert Jordan in his story whenever he passed. And I'm sure that there's even more homages to Hobb that we don't even know, right? Probably between them.
More than likely.
Yeah.
I mean, they're friendly in general, and they obviously have spent a lot of time together over the years as they both worked on these massive stories.
Mm-hmm.
And I do find it really interesting. As you say, there is that parallel on that key moment for these heirs, these lost heirs to the royal blood with their wolves. And the warging that we get in A Song of Ice and Fire, and we get the wit that we have in the realm of the Elderlings, they're the same but not.
Yeah, and they're used to different effects in the story. Yeah, sure. I think one interesting thing that hasn't happened yet, and this is slightly spoilery, but I don't think Jon will be a king ever.
No, I don't either.
And Fitz really
never sits the throne.
Yeah, never you know what I mean? Like, I think that those the sacrifice and duty and never getting that payoff, I think or the appreciation even that they deserve.
Yeah.
I think that's probably likely to happen with Jon as well. So Jon and Fitz are very, very similar. Is it safe to assume that you like Fitz a lot more than Jon?
I think Fitz is more recognizably mentally damaged in that he reads, and this is something I only learned since finding Booktube. Fitz is depressed. He shows every symptom of depression. He thinks as a depressed person, because I am a depressed person. And I mean that in the sense that I have been diagnosed with depression. I'm not just sad a lot. And it genuinely changes the way you think. And I didn't know until other people pointed it out on Booktube that Fitz was depressed, because everything he did made perfect sense to me. The way he reacted to people, the way he thought about himself. And that makes him very, very real to me. Jon is a troubled young man, and he certainly has a lot on his shoulders, but I wouldn't say that he's clinically depressed. I wouldn't say that he's damaged fundamentally. I think he has some childhood trauma to work through, but
yeah, no, definitely. And
reasonably normal.
And with Jon, there is a sense of entitlement that I don't ever feel from Fitz.
No.
Jon is somewhere between being scorned for his name, but also being revered for it, right? Lord Snow. And that's one of the things that we don't necessarily get from Fitz, is that once he's brought into the royal family, we do not see him kind of have to go back to lesser people than him, if that makes sense. Like the Night's Watch is degraded at the point of the main series, and Jon is now bumping elbows with rapists and murderers and thieves, and he was sold the wrong thing, right? The Wall was out of everyone's mind, and the Wall was prestigious at one point, but now it has fallen. So I think Jon is interesting because of that. Like, he goes from a position of being the lowest on the totem pole, being scorned by Catelyn, to end up going to the Night's Watch and having to like reevaluate who he is. And even though they mock him with Lord Snow, I think you can kind of feel that he thinks he's better than some of the people. Now, that's something he grows and works through. And
and it does get a really good mention and a really good scene, and we get a great moment of growth from Jon. And we, as you say, Fitz never gets any moment of recognition. There's never a time at which he has power over other people. Like, he doesn't have a Lord Commander phase in his journey.
Yeah.
And I think the closest he gets is when he's offered, okay, if this happens, then will you look after X? And that turns to custard, because almost everything in Fitz's life does. But
he does get recognition in Fool's Quest, though. The scene, he does. The fan service scene.
And here's the thing. I mean, this is the trilogy that ends this saga, and he's in his 60s at this point. So that's a long wait for any kind of acknowledgement. And yet the flip side of the trope is Jon kind of knows his family. He kind of knows, other way around. Fitz knows his family. Fitz knows who his parents are, well, in that he knows where his mother is from, and he knows who his father is. He knows who he's related to. Jon doesn't. You know, I mean, that's really clear. He believes, well, he doesn't even know. He doesn't even have a theory as to who his mother is, and nobody will tell him. And that is a very different set of internal security about who you are.
Yeah, and the relationships with her father are very different. I think Fitz forever wonders about his father and never really got the appropriate time with him, whereas Jon is almost plagued by the shadow of Ned Stark, and what being honorable means. We see that rub off on Jon quite a bit, and fortunately, Jon's able to learn lessons that Ned refused to. Until it was too late. So in that manner, they're very different. How they view their father figures, where the kind of the maternal presence is completely absent for both of them. Yeah.
Although, I mean, you say that, and I always find that chivalry does play quite a big role in Fitz's mind. His very name is constant bastard of chivalry, because Fitz is an Old English term for not in wedlock. Ultimately, so his very existence is labeled this in the same way as Snow does, but that's not the name people call Jon. Jon is Jon.
Yeah,
but Fitz's name is Fitz Chivalry. Fitz is a nickname, and the fact that chivalry did have that legacy of chivalrous behavior, the fact that the nobles were upset that he abdicated. They wanted him as their king. And they're left with this kid that has just screwed everything up by existing, I think puts a very big shadow over Fitz's life, in much the same way as the loss of Ned, who was this very noble, very loyal, very honest, very highly respected man, does over Jon. And the death of those fathers very early, because if anyone doesn't know, Ned dies early. I'm sorry, where the hell have you been? Like, seriously. It very much puts both of them in that questioning who they are as men, as they're young men. I mean, they're both of them in their teens when their father gets killed.
Yeah, and you have, I don't recall if Fitz does, but Jon certainly thinks, what would Ned do in this scenario? What would Ned do with Robb heading south? Like, what's the right thing to do? And it's because he reveres his father.
Absolutely. And assumes his father would be making the right decision and wanting to do the same. The perhaps flip side is there was somebody who wanted to mother Fitz, whereas nobody wanted to mother Jon. And yet both of them feel very motherless. Both of them feel like there's just not any women in their lives, which makes them both very, what's the word I'm looking for? Edgy, nervous around women. They're both of them a bit like, oh, a girl. Okay.
I mean, Jon also has the plague of the Night's Watch oaths, right?
Yes,
like he gave it up before he even knew what it was, and then he meets Ygritte, and everything has changed, right?
Absolutely.
But Lady Patience is the complete opposite, the antithesis of Catelyn Stark in many ways.
Very much so. You know, her husband's bastard, she wanted to claim. And again, also very differently, Patience didn't go on to have other children.
Yes.
You know, and how much does that change the character? Would Catelyn have decided to claim him if she hadn't been fertile herself? And who knows? Maybe.
Probably, because that would have made Jon most likely heir.
Yeah.
So
and
she would have had
family duty, honor. You know, those are important things to her as a Tully. And to bring that into the Starks would mean her duty to the family Stark would be to ensure the bloodline continues. So that always got me.
I think I like Patience more than Catelyn. Not I'm not saying as a character, but like Patience is obviously
she's lovely,
way more graceful than Catelyn is to Jon.
I would far rather be friends with Patience than Catelyn. That's for sure. She's not a very forgiving person. Catelyn.
No, not at all.
She holds a grudge, very tightly. The other thing I was going to talk about with the similarities is the sense of there is something bigger going on than the story that we're getting on page. In A Song of Ice and Fire, obviously, there's something. There's the others. There's the walkers. There's this Heart of Winter, and you're like, what is this thing that's greater, that's causing this brewing conflict? And in Realm of the Elderlings, the entire series is called Realm of the Elderlings, and it's not until the very end of the series that you start to see how the Elderlings had put this shadow over the whole story. And so do you think that that's what's is likely to be where the story goes, and that we start to see how this Heart of Winter has been bubbling away in the background?
So I think it's probably going to be pretty similar to Tad Williams's Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn series. And they're very much based off the Scythe, which are, white, almost immortal beings from the north that came from a different land, and yada yada yada. So I think it's gonna be pretty similar to that. I am a big believer that they are not just brain dead zombies that are just walking south. I don't think that that's really what's going to happen. I don't think it fits. Fits. See what I did there? But I do think that we're going to see more, not just how they were created, but like I think they most likely have their own culture. They clearly have their own language based on
clearly
them in the book.
The books do give us that.
Yeah, and they're intelligent as well. In the prologue of Game of Thrones, they're clearly looking at Royce and trying to figure out who he is.
You fit a lot of criteria here. Let's just check.
And is that sword what we think it is? And then as soon as the sword isn't, they go, okay, move in.
Oh, okay, well, you're just toast.
Yeah, easy. Right.
We don't need you for anything.
Yeah, so there's obvious hints that the White Walkers are far more complex than what we got in the television show. So I think yes, in ways, but I don't know if it'll be the exact same, because in Realm of the Elderlings, I kind of got the sense that while it was always in the shadows in the background, that like the main conflict kind of switched each series, right? Like obviously the Red Raiders are a thing, and then we go on from there. But I feel like we got to peek in the life of Fitz during different times where Buck and Buckkeep were going through stuff. Whereas like, I feel like from the set out, A Song of Ice and Fire is about this major thing. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like I feel like that conflict is supposed to be central to it. Whereas like Realm of the Elderlings, it kind of like grows into that, I guess.
This is one of the times where, having read it as many times as I have, it puts me in a very different position to people who have read it maybe even once or twice.
Yeah.
And that because I know it so well, I can see the hand of the Elderlings, or rather the people that we encounter at the end of the story. I can see their hand in Farseer. I can see how, while the Red Ship Raiders appear to be the bad guys, that they in turn are being driven by a greater threat. And so again, it's the advantage to rereads. Reread, people, just seriously, reread. You will find so much.
But didn't Hobb plan on ending with Tawny Man? Like, wasn't that the original ending? Was the Tawny Man ending?
Well, the original ending was Fool's Quest. It was Assassin's Quest. There was going to be nothing more in the series, and Live Ships was going to be a completely different thing. They weren't connected. But then a character appears in the Live Ships books who she didn't anticipate being there. And instead of telling her brain, this character doesn't belong here, take them away, she's gone, why has my brain put this here? I'm going to see where it goes. And in allowing herself the freedom to follow where that character took her, discovered, these worlds are connected. And, okay, now I need to wrap up this story because now I have all of this extra stuff. And then, yes, Fool's Fate was at that point the culmination of that story. And then she wrote Soldier Son, which you're currently reading.
Yep.
I will finish it again. I'm not a fan of Navarre, but she wrote Soldier Son. clearly it hasn't done so well.
Yeah.
And I imagine that bubbling away in the background, she's thinking of the story that she's told about Fitz and gone, there's much more to tell here. I've put a lot of things into these books that didn't pay off yet.
Yeah.
And we got Rain Wilds. Rain Wilds comes out at the height of YA, or the birth of YA, and gets so heavily interfered with by the publishers that it almost couldn't succeed. And the final trilogy is her going, right, all of the info's here now. Let's tie it all together. And
now there's rumblings that there might be more, right?
Yep, it's confirmed she's writing one in the world. Whether it's a continuation of the story, I don't know. But she did several months ago put out a very fabulous tweet. And if you know, you know. But she just said, to be or not to be. And fans of the series all lost our minds. We were like, oh my God.
That's exciting.
So yes. And then not long after, she confirmed that, yes, it's a new one. It's coming. So I am very much with bated breath waiting for that one.
Well, we'll probably see that before Wins a Winner. So,
well, possibly. But I mean, I've said this to you in comments to Bend the Knee because I'm a massive Song of Ice and Fire fan. So I listen to Bend the Knee. You guys are great. Right. And one of my comments there has been, he's probably written the book several times now in different iterations because that's how he operates. He writes it. He
rewrites a lot.
In this order, this is what will happen. And he writes until he hits a barrier and goes, oh, okay, I've got to get to that bit differently. Go back, start again. And I think he's written it several times over and just hasn't quite worked out how to get everybody in the right place at the right time.
Yeah, knowing that he's working with, what's supposed to be one more book, which I don't know how that's going to work. But he does rewrite it quite a bit.
We're going to get it come down. This is the biggest it's going to be, where we are now in the story, where everybody's as far-flung and separated as they're going to be. Every event from here on out that we think needs to happen brings people closer together, which brings the story in and makes it more compact. People are in the same places. The same events are happening to people. Rather than needing to account for a separate event here and a separate event here. I think he can do it, but it's going to be, because they're all coming together, they've got to come together in the right order.
Yeah, definitely.
Work out. And he's clearly having a problem with that.
It's the toughest one to write, without a doubt. Hopefully you can do it. I hope.
Yeah.
I remain positive because it costs me nothing.
That's right. And why put negativity out there? I mean, let's face it. It's not like he needs to write anything else. He could have just stopped and gone, I'm going to run my trains.
The man's like 76. I will not be liable. Yeah.
Happily.
At 65, I don't care what commitments I have. I'm not doing anything.
No.
Nothing. Literally nothing.
And he has won the literary equivalent of the jackpot. If I won the jackpot, I'm not working. I'm doing whatever the hell I want for the rest of my life.
Yeah, I mean, one of the big things about
writing.
One of the things about George that people don't know or forget is he liked to jump around a lot.
Oh yeah.
I saw Raph say this, but he's right. Is like George was very much like a project for a little while guy, like ADHD to his projects. He would jump a lot.
Yeah.
And I'm sure he's just really tired of Westeros.
Oh, I'm no doubt. I think his fascination with its history is a blessing because we've had so much other material come out. It's only made us hungrier for the main series.
Yeah.
But what we've got is amazing.
Oh, for sure.
I mean, Fire and Blood. Who on earth would have predicted that a fake history book could be so brilliant to read? Because it is. It's fun.
Do you think there's enough history in Realm of the Elderlings to do something like that?
Possibly. I think because it's 6 duchies, so you've ultimately got 6 kingdoms in much the same way as you've got the 7 in Westeros, there will have been that shift of power and the shift of boundaries and the warring over natural resources and, natural allies that formed because of the way the land is structured, or in the same way as you get the North and the Vale, who are both difficult to access and get very cut off in winter. They're quite often allies. You've got the Riverlands and the Crown Lands, or the Westerlands, depending on who's on whichever throne. So in what is now the duchies, you've got Buck and maybe Shokes, who are both coastal, both rugged, but then up in the north, they're very isolated. They'll have been on their own. It's very icy. It's very cut off in the winter. Inland, you've got Ripon and the one that Regal is from, which is escaping me at the moment.
I can't remember it. It's been too long.
But I normally focus on the coastal ones. But but they're both inland. They are both more agricultural. They're not about forestry or fishing or any of those. So they have natural allies, and they will have had conflict the same as any kingdoms would have, where they have things the other wants.
Yeah.
And so there's scope, definitely. Am I very interested? No.
Yeah, I don't think
I know now about the cataclysm that caused the story that I now have. So I think she's sort of closed the door on that herself. And she's not a history buff in this.
I was going to say, I feel like her writing doesn't really lend itself to that. I mean, she's really more about like the interpersonal thoughts, and the first person narrator is a good example. She does it in Live Ship as well. But I don't know. I mean, I'm sure she's capable. She's a very competent writer, but I just I don't know if that would suit her style the best.
And she doesn't leave as many hooks in there for the past. And George does. George is constantly referencing history.
Yeah.
And, stories of history. He talks about the boys who are, when they're children, pretending to be the knights of old. So bang, okay, there's a story. How do the kids know who these knights are? What are the stories being told about these knights? How much of those stories are true? And that interest that he has in history really shows.
Yeah, and he understands the mystery of history. And that's the hook, and that's why the series will be talked about, even if he never finishes it. It'll be talked about for 100 years from now.
Absolutely.
Because of that. And wondering about, I feel like Lord of the Rings. Now I'm speaking.
I was literally thinking exactly that.
Yeah, I'm speaking specifically of Lord of the Rings, not similarly, but like I think a lot of what ifs are pondered in Lord of the Rings. I think that those are strong in A Song of Ice and Fire as well, but even more so the what really happened here kind of questions, like, well, did this happen? Did it not? One of my favorite periods in history is the Bronze Age collapse, because we don't know what happened. We have ideas, but like we really don't know. And those are the things that I get really fixated on. And George writes in a way that where he doesn't have to have everything play out. He doesn't need an answer for everything. And it's
real.
Yeah, it's one of the special things about the series. And for something like Stormlight Archive, right? I feel like almost 99% of anything that Brandon Sanderson mentions in a book pays off and has purpose. Like there's almost nothing there as far as like, oh, I wonder if I could just like ponder on this thing. And if it is there,
not going to leave you the mysteries.
yeah, he's gonna tie it all up, which is a very satisfying experience as a reader. But for me personally, it doesn't live on. No. Whereas like A Song of Ice and Fire just lives in my brain daily, and I'm like, Barristan.
It's one of the reasons why I'm okay if I don't get any more in A Song of Ice and Fire. The value of just thinking about what could happen. We've got so much material to work with.
And what has happened, right? Did the Faceless Men cause the doom of Valyria? Most likely. Likely.
And how was it tied to Lannister gold? And how does this tie with the Maesters? And how does that tie in with the Death of Dragons? And suddenly you're spending time building these stories that could fit what we've got. I wouldn't change that for the world. The number of hours of joy I've had talking with people, pondering theories, hearing theories, listening to them, thinking, oh, does that fit? And on my next reread, I'll go, oh, yeah, that does fit. Or, oh, nah, see, that pokes a massive hole in your theory. No, your theory's toast. That is so pleasurable to me as a reader.
Yeah, I agree.
To be able to have those discussions.
Yeah, I think one of the things I see, though, is I see people, you get really caught up in a theory. You know, everyone has their pet theories or whatever.
Oh, yeah.
But I feel like they're not living in reality whenever they think it's all going to be answered, because like I don't think that's ever been his. Like, for instance,
we're never going to know some things, that I'm already certain of.
Yeah, we will never know if Corn Halfham was Arthur Dane, because it doesn't actually matter.
I think he was.
He might have been.
No, it doesn't.
He might have been.
Maybe
the story works
about
with
the right age, so
it works or it works without it. Either way, right? Or
and he did learn to use a sword with the left hand.
Pretty interesting.
And this is not spoilery. This is very much a tertiary character. This is not important to the plot, and it's very. But
there are people out there who are like, if that doesn't get because they love it. They're like, if that doesn't get answered by the end of the series, I hate the series. And I'm like, guys,
which is ridiculous.
That's so ridiculous.
Then you don't get to keep your theory if it's not confirmed. If it isn't confirmed, then you can still go on believing that it was. And hey, that's fine with me.
Yeah.
The one of my favorites is Roberts at Indeed Geek. I'm not sure if you watch him very often.
Yep.
I love his theory that Ashara Dane isn't dead. She's married to Howland Reed and is the mother of the Reeds. I love that theory. I love it so much because there's nothing that argues it in the text.
Well, Ashara Dane's not dead.
I don't care.
Ashara Dane's not dead. There's absolutely no way.
And there's a lot of that theory supported in the book purely in the fact that the Danes don't hate the Starks. And I just love the fact that we can build a theory that literally has no sentence in the books anywhere to base it on. It comes down to, what do we know of the culture? It comes down to, what do we know of the law? It comes down to, could that fit with a story that's been made into a story about what happened in a time and place that is full of confusion? It's so wonderful. I just love it. So good.
Yeah, I think that's those are the reasons why things will go on. But even how it's written, right, with the bias of the POV, which is something that Hobb is really good at.
Absolutely.
The POV writing in both series is very strong, and even Fire and Blood, Allison is represented in The Dying of the Dragons as just absolutely almost like a witch. I mean, but was she?
And that's the thing, is that the histories are written by the victor.
Did she kill King Jaehaerys?
Well, we don't know, do we?
I don't know.
It's all very dodgy. And that's literally the joy of going, okay, if the victors did write it, then they're going to want to hide all of the really shitty things that they did and point out all of the ones that the other guys did, even if they didn't. Because then they can go, see, we're better than them.
Oh, yeah. I mean, just look at
how history works.
Position matters greatly. Titles matter greatly in both of these series.
Very much
so. For instance, right, like Jaime is Kingslayer, but he did the right thing.
He really, really did. And anyone who had taken the time to talk to Jaime would know that. No one did. And so the outcome of the event is all that's known.
Yeah.
Not the circumstances of it. And that's something that I think that Ryan Condal, who is the showrunner, as you very well know, of House of the Dragon, is doing brilliantly.
Condal knows.
I'm really impressed with what he's doing with House.
He knows the ending of Dunk and Egg.
Really? He knows what happens at Summerhall.
He knows what happened at Summerhall. That really,
it's important.
Yeah, I kind of want to kidnap him and ask him.
I think a lot of us do. I know I know I messaged you in Discord and said, have you seen the shorts from the interview that was done with Ryan Condal from History of Westeros? Well, I've watched the whole thing now, and I'm even more impressed with his knowledge and the things that he's spoken of. He got asked, who was your favorite character in Fire and Blood? And he mentioned someone that's not even in the show. He's like, my favorite is Visenya, because of all of these reasons. And I'm like, this is a man who has read the books, has thought about the books, has theories about the books. I'm okay with this man being in charge of a TV show.
Yeah, him and George are fairly good friends from what I can tell. You know what?
It does appear that way, and it makes me very happy.
You know, one of my favorite, speaking of Summerhall, this is my theory about cold hands.
Oh, okay.
I don't think his hands are frostbitten. I think they were burned, and I think it's Dunk. I think that he saves in the fire of Summerhall by putting his hands into the fire and pulling somebody out, or the eggs, or whatever it might be. And I think that his hands are actually burnt. And then I think he went north. Because Bloodraven says Bloodraven is asked about cold hands, and he says, "Oh, an old friend." And Dunk and Bloodraven have a connection. I think Dunk is cold hands.
Oh, I have to read them again now. Oh, I like that, Jimmy. I like that a lot.
Yeah, I'm like 90% sure.
Was his height mentioned at all? I'm going to have to go back and look. Oh,
I think his hands are burned. I don't think it's frostbite. Yeah.
That I'm going to be so impressed. And also you get the children of the forest, and they make that very wonderful statement. He died a long time ago. And it becomes vague because obviously they're so long lived that what is a long time?
I think he died inside when Egg dies. Yeah.
Oh, I think that's marvelous. Oh, yeah. I do like that theory. That's wonderful. Isn't Bloodraven from the Way of Edan?
No, that's Day Raven, yes, and it's significantly worse than Bloodraven.
Yeah, but I'm very taken with that idea. I will definitely be bringing that in because.
But I was going to say we're talking about like character, like Jamie, right? Like these characters, like perception matters. Well, like if you think about Chade, like Chade's not a great guy. Like
Chade's freaking creep.
He has a lot of problems, but he is revered because of his position and title, and he kind of gets to control the narrative. But the more we find out about Chade, the more conflicted that we get as the reader.
That's right. Especially and the more information Fitz gets, the more he starts to question the things he's been told in the past.
Yes.
And it's very similar in a way to where you've got Varys and Peter in King's Landing, who are very much controlling what people know and when. It's like, oh, I'm just going to save that bit of news till it's going to tip the scales one way or another.
Yeah.
And I very much get the sense that Shade's been doing that for so very long in the Six Duchies.
Yeah. And Shade gets away with it because he's privileged, right? Like
he is privileged. And because he's advising the throne, that information is hugely important and hugely useful.
Yeah.
If he didn't work for the throne, he would be who they were after. They were like, whoever has this knowledge, we've got to get rid of them because they're dangerous.
Yeah.
He could have been the villain of the piece easily.
Shade's like a super big important piece for Realm of the Elderlings and why it works for me, because like I've had to work through like loving people who aren't perfect and have like actively damaged me. And it's a really like difficult and messy thing to process, and Fitz processing that with Chade was very beneficial for me as a reader.
It is, and accepting that that person has their flaws and that person may never, better themselves through it, and loving them anyway is, I think, a difficult thing for most of us in one way or another. And Hob does kind of specialize in that. She sort of focuses on difficult relationships and how do you navigate them.
Yeah.
And can they be navigated? Because sometimes they can't. And how do you get out of it if you can't?
Yeah.
What is going to be the damage?
And also, for better or for worse, sometimes like there's people who are just put into our lives or we're positioned there, and you get like, if you're lucky, a good 70, 80 years on the planet, and for better or for worse, they can impact you, and like you have to make the decision, whether or not to keep them around. It's just like a very complicated thing. I think that's one of the best parts of the series is Fitz's relationship with Chade. It's very, very, very complex.
Mm-hmm. Yep, absolutely. There is a relationship later on in the series, and I will be vague, where one of the characters has to interact on a daily basis for a good portion of their lives with someone who has abused them in the past. And when you get to the end of the series and we see that finally come to a resolution, that's incredibly cathartic for a lot of people who have had to be in circles that include people who have physically or mentally genuinely damaged them.
Yeah.
And that's something that Hob does impeccably, basically, is give you those catharsis moments.
Yeah.
And George isn't so big on the catharsis moments, but of those aha moments.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, who do you think the more pessimistic writer is of the two? Because I think it's Hob.
Pessimistic, I think
George actually has a little bit of a more optimistic outlook than Hob does, based on the stories.
I think, to be honest, I think they're both about the same, in that Robin Hobb, her characters are working toward a better potential future. Like, it could be better, let's work toward it. And I think a lot of George's characters are very similar in that what we have now is just not great, people. Come on. And both of them are trying to shift against the status quo. People don't want to accept that change is necessary. They don't want to accept that, okay, we actually have to change something fundamental and move past this thing that's stopping us. But I wouldn't say that either of them are particularly hopeful or pessimistic. I think they both show potential for good things. And it's
I have found that Hob, for me, it feels as if Hob is trying to make me find the light.
Okay.
Even if that light is very dim and dark, but like she's kind of like, yep, guess what? The resolution of the situation was horrible, but hey, you kind of got to smile because you had a good time, kind of, right? Like, whereas I feel like George in many ways is empowering the unlikely or the the downcasted or the ones who have been typecasted as whatever they are. Like, obviously Bran and Jaime are both Kingslayers, but like Samwell Tarly is a great example of this, and I think has a huge part to play later in the series. But I've always felt like George is trying to show that the heroes aren't who you think they are. Whereas I feel, if I had to guess, if I got to talk to Robin Hobb, I have a feeling that her outlook on the world is very, very bleak. But that's just the vibe I get from it. That's
interesting.
That's just how I feel about it. Like, there are moments of triumph in Realm of the Elderlings, but it was mostly me having to reflect on like all the things that went bad. But like, at least we're still here. Like, we're still doing this.
Yeah.
I also wonder, like, I guess, like, where the series are going. I think, and I might be wrong, but I feel like A Song of Ice and Fire might possibly be working towards a more revolutionary aspect where like things like I don't think Regency might not at the end of the series may not be what is.
No, we might see a genuine shift in
like a real reform. And I don't think that Fitz ever really even considers this, right? He kind of it's
but I
kind
think the world isn't ready for that. I think that the way Hobb has written it is that there's an element of stagnation that's still there. Whereas there's very much a sense that revolution of some kind is in the offing. In A Song of Ice and Fire, people are ready for change in A Song of Ice and Fire, and it's more a question that the powers that be are resisting it. So there's that element, but
Evie said, "Is Hobb pessimistic writer, or is it more that Fitz's perspective is pessimistic?" I will counter that with Navarre, because Navarre.
Things are pretty bleak there.
Oh my god!
And he's not as much fun as Fitz.
Bro hates fat people.
That what you wish.
Navarre, all he does is make fun of his fat friend. It's crazy. Like, he literally just like
shaming in that series.
It'd be great if he was just like not fat.
How bad it was.
It would be great if he was
really
just
bad.
I think that's on purpose, though. I think Navarre, we're supposed to dislike Navarre doing it. Like, I don't think Hobbs like, you know what I'm gonna do? I'm gonna get it.
You haven't read Forest Mage yet.
I have not.
Fat shaming in this trilogy is really bad, and it's a problem.
But I've only read book 1, but I felt like in book 1 we were supposed to have a problem with it, you know?
Oh yeah. I mean, I just find Navarre really boring. It's like
Yeah, I can see.
I formed a connection to Fitz.
Yeah.
There was something about him that I could connect to.
Yeah, there's more distance with
I never found that with Navarre, and I think I probably wouldn't say it so loudly and so boldly if I didn't share that with so many other readers that I've spoken to about the trilogy.
Yeah, there's more
I
distance.
don't know anyone who goes, yeah, I like Navarre.
I think if I had to pick a character in Realm of the Elderlings that Hobb would have loved to torture, I think it would have been Samwell Tarly.
Actually, yes, she probably would have.
Yeah, I don't think that's the difference. I think if Samwell is in Realm of the Elderlings, oh man, he's
not going to have a good time.
But Samwell Tarly, well, obviously he's a write-in for George, but like in A Song of Ice and Fire, he's getting the women, he's slaying ice zombies, like Samwell
He's a massive nod to Sam. You know, I mean, George makes no bones about how much he loves Lord of the Rings. He's there very definitely as a Sam on purpose. And who doesn't love Sam? There's something wrong with you if you don't love Sam. That's the point of Sam. Yeah. Is to be there would be amazing.
But I feel like Hobb would have tortured him. I feel like Hobb would have maybe literally tortured him. And I think that's where I feel like maybe Realm of the Elderlings is a little darker or pessimist. Maybe pessimist is the wrong word, but I think it's a little more brutal.
I think there's a lot more, and it seems really strange because of the 2 series, A Song of Ice and Fire is somehow more realistic. But there's an element of realism in the people of the 6 duchies in the Realm of the Elderlings, and that some of the people in that series are as ordinarily evil as real people are. And we kind of don't have that in A Song of Ice and Fire. We just have that range of grey where the selfishness element goes from one extreme to another. Whereas in
I think the Boltons are pretty bad.
Yeah, but how much of that is because that's what they've been told is their identity? If your family identity is flaying people, how much of it has been played into, and is it then a question of nature nurture, and you're just brought up around insane people?
I mean, it's also pretty remote up there. That probably doesn't help at all. But I think they're evil.
Also, nobody marries into the Boltons.
Yeah, because they know they're going to have to sleep with Ruth.
But going back in history, nobody marries the Boltons. So how inbred is that line? Oh, we don't know.
There's a lot of inbreds in A Song of Ice and Fire. I would say.
There is. So, among the northern families, I mean, George has done a wonderful job, and we've got, not necessarily family trees, but family trees can be extrapolated from the appendices. And oh my God, I just said that. I am such a geek. But putting that aside for a moment, we can look at the histories and go, okay, the Starks they brought in Dustins, we've got Karstarks, we've got people from almost everywhere else in the north, except the Boltons. And that goes back for hundreds of years. Yeah. So everyone else, genetically, probably quite sound. The Boltons?
I mean, the Targaryens obviously had a huge issue with this as well.
That kicked us into a whole new theory.
Yeah. Also, the Slavers are also pretty evil.
The Slavers are, but we have that in our own history, and we know, in terms of human history, it was driven, as it is in Planetos, that it's driven by profit, it's driven by greed. And slavery gets touched on in Realm of the Elderlings as well, where it talks about the value of life, the value of humanity, and what it does to the people who keep slaves, what it does to their own value to themselves, to the value of anything living. And it becomes this big, discussion point. And I think George is coming to it from a different point, and he's going, I'm just going to up front go, no, it's bad, and get rid of it. But then I'm going to show you what happens when you just get rid of it without a plan. Because it's so essential to the economy of the East that you're seeing it in Essos. You're seeing a collapse of economy, a collapse of civilizations, because there are no slaves.
Which is
the
awesome.
Fields are getting to. It is awesome.
The collapse.
But there's
The
also
collapse.
a lot of slaves there who aren't now eating. And he brings to the fore a lot of incredibly valid points. If you've had somebody who's been a slave their whole life, is highly intelligent, has been treasured for their knowledge and used as a teacher of knowledge, who now is a free man, no job, no house, nothing, it falls down because Dany came in with no system to replace it. It's all collapsing around her. And it's telling that you've got two authors both going, how do you fight slavery? How do you resist this? When should we have drawn the line? Where do we go with the way we value people, that this was ever a thing? And I love that they both are really kind of put slavery front and center for quite a big part of their story.
Yeah. I mean, George is also answering, because he always said his problem with Tolkien was like, what was Aragorn's tax policy or whatever.
Exactly.
And people always go, well, what was King Joffrey's? And it was like, well, he's doing that with Dany. She's showing it with Dany.
Absolutely.
In Marine. But I also
getting infrastructure in A Song of Ice and Fire. You get the sense that there is a tithe. They talk about storing stuff for winter and how they're all telling all of their vassals, you need to be storing this much for winter. To ensure there's clearly a system in place that forms that channel of money.
Yeah.
And while it's never overtly stated, it's clearly there.
Yeah.
So
I also think that George just answering slavery with fire and blood is massively satisfying. And just burning slavers is pretty awesome. Like, people are like, oh, you can tell Dany's awful because she's crucifying slavers. I'm like, nah, that's awesome. I love it.
It is. It's like that's a hell of a stand to take.
Yeah.
And I think that's what George is saying. It isn't as simple as that. It's like, yeah, we'd love to be able to go in and go, just stop. But if you do go in and do that, what you're causing is this ripple effect of disaster. And we see this in reality, where we get Western countries who go into Africa or Southeast Asia or wherever and go, oh, you can't be doing that. Stop it. And economies just collapse because the civilization functions in a certain way. And if you don't help that system adjust, it can't. And
yeah,
that's what we're seeing with Dany. And
I think Dany's struggle is that she's not from there, right? Like the white savior trope, like Dany is falling into it.
And he's pointing it out beautifully.
Yeah. I don't
that moral stand is great, fabulous.
But I don't know how much of it's caring about the economy of it though. Like for me, if I was like, can we collapse the economy or get rid of, I think everyone would choose collapse the economy, right? I think that Dany is learning what it means to be a leader, or failing to learn, possibly. She's learning her lessons.
It's the lesson. She didn't consider that this would have this level of impact. And that's the failure. And that's where having Varys or Peter or Tyrion, if things go to plan, is essential. She needs somebody who will look ahead of that step and go, great plan. We need to do this first. Yeah. And that's what she's been lacking, because Jorah's not the smartest bear.
And was a slaver himself.
He's a creeper. He wanted to sell slaves. He's not as lovely as he appeared on the show. And she needs better wisdom. Barristan, now that he's part of the whole Brains Trust, he doesn't strike me as a particularly deep thinker either. So she's very much lacking that forward-thinking person who can say to her, just take a second to think about it.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, going to be a lot of her problem going forward, because she's established now in her power. But when she does get somebody who has the knowledge she needs, she's not going to listen.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and I think she also, like, the whole idea of, like, her riding away on Drogon is, like, her killing the girl, right? Like, kill the boy, become the man kind of thing.
Absolutely. And that compassion that she's had for other people is going to be burnt away over time. I think we all agree on that to some degree.
Do you think she's going to go mad?
I don't know necessarily. I would say she's going to go mad. I do think she's going to become bloody minded. She's going to be less flexible. She's just going to make a decision and nothing will change her mind, which isn't madness, but is certainly damaging.
Yeah. I've always thought that she will be
lose.
Actually similar to Fitz. I feel like she's going to be an unsung hero in the end. I feel like she will be a massive, if not the most key piece of fighting the others.
Yes.
And I think it'll be a sacrificial type deal, and it'll be sad because she'll never have the recognition in the history books, as we know in the series.
And that may be a joint doom for Dany and Jon.
Possibly, yeah.
Fire is that necessity of the two of them.
Yep.
But yeah, she's already going to go down. Like, this is a real place. She's going to go down in history as a key piece of that time, and no one's going to really know why.
Yeah,
I don't know that she was really important, and I think that George is doing that really well. But again, it's going to be something that history will tell and portray as one thing, when in reality it was something else.
Exactly. Yeah,
and I really love the way he does that.
Yeah, that's kind of what I'm under the impression of. Who do you think, like, we're talking about, like, who Dany would need around her to help make better decisions? Who do you think is the best, like, informer / guidance that a ruler could have in Buck?
In Buck, probably, I'm just trying to think. I mean, at this stage of events, that we're on to the next generation. I mean, we have the advantage of the skill coteries, so not quite the same. But they certainly seem set up for now, in that you've got the princes who we have at the end of the book, Prosper and Diligence, and they have at their disposal several coteries that are placed all over the Six Duchies, which had been missing for several generations. So they're getting better regional facts. This is what's happening. This is what the weather's doing. This is what the economy's doing. This is where there's unsettled people. This is where people are fine. I think that the structure of the Six Duchies is more inherently magical than what we have in A Song of Ice and Fire.
Yeah, it's built in.
Yeah, perfect. It quite practical. You know, so long as everyone's got ravens, you've got that connection. But that becomes less real. It's not a lived memory. It's not a mind-to-mind connection of this is what's happening. This is my interpretation of what's happening that I'm writing down, and you're going to read it and you'll take your impression of what I've written down, and when you share that information, I'm going to share it in a way that will be interpreted a different way again, which is always the bane of humans' existence. You know, is what I'm getting true, even if it's factual, is it true? Because fact is not the same as truth.
In what way?
Well, factually, Jaime is a Kingslayer. The truth is that Jaime killed a man to save other people. So,
I see what you're saying. Yeah. Or the fact in history will be that Brienne killed Renly whenever, in fact,
when the truth is that's not what happened. And so I like that when authors play with that. And George is so good at it. He's so good at it. And then he adds things like some of the people who are lords or ladies, they're not literate. They're not even reading their own messages. You know,
it would seem that that's a pretty big piece of power.
Okay, so the ambassador, who is trained somewhere else by some ephemeral other group of people,
who
is
may or
telling
may
you
not
what
have helped.
information that you're basing your policies on.
Yeah.
Okay, that sounds smart.
Seems like a pretty important group of people that may or may not have had a hand in the dying of the dragons.
Just a little. What's his name? Grandmaster. Robert just had a thing on it, actually, in Deep Geek. The period of time after the Dance of Dragons, where you had, for those who are watching House of the Dragons, I shan't say, when there is a person on the throne and there's a group of people advising, that gets winnowed down to one person for well over a year and a half, nearly 2 years. That's a lot of power. And that's the person responsible for writing the histories of the time. So there's nothing there. You're like, gee, I wonder. Yeah.
Evie asked me a question. She said, "Kiss, marry, kill. Realm of the Elderlings, A Song of Ice and Fire, Soldier Son." That's really easy. Kill Soldier Son.
Yeah.
I would kiss Realm of the Elderlings, and I would marry A Song of Ice and Fire. And I imagine yours is similar, but you'd flip. You'd flip.
Yeah, absolutely. We would both kill Soldier Son.
Yes.
And I don't know about kiss, marry, and kill, but maybe a fair marry and kill. Put it on the side. We'll call it a throuple, and
we won't tell Hob. We won't tell her. No. Don't worry.
But it's really difficult to separate them in terms of quality of storytelling, and they do it very differently.
Yeah, I say Realm of the Elderlings is like epic slice of life, you know, whereas I think A Song of Ice and Fire falls into more of the traditional epic fantasy, almost that historical fantasy as well, but like very much.
And yet, as I was saying before, it has somehow a more practical infrastructure in terms of fantasy that we don't normally get.
Yeah.
And he just does it so marvelously.
Yeah, and you know, a lot of the skill comes in how he writes it. Because I know people are like, "Did you know this is based off this period in our history?" And I'm like, "Yes." And they're like, that means that it's not good or it's not as impressive. And I'm like, I couldn't.
Have you read a real life history book? Like seriously, people.
But even then, like a lot of fantasy is based on histories, and if the writing isn't up to snuff, like that's what really matters is how you implement it, but also how you write it. I think everything is informed by something before it anyways. So I'm a pretty big believer.
I mean, it has to be. I mean, there's nothing new under the sky. And reality is often stranger than fiction. You know, Alan says however many times there with the Peloponnesian War, that should just never have happened. It's the most ridiculous thing ever in history. And when you look at it, you're like, yeah, if that was in a story, there is no way in hell it would fly.
Yes.
It just wouldn't fly.
Yeah, and I think George said he takes things from history and he turns it up 10 times.
Dials it to 11.
Yeah, which is pretty good. Do you think there's any history that Hob went with? I know, like, for instance, Soldier Son, I was thinking it was Native Americans, but she actually said in an interview it's not Native Americans. She said that is not she actually was, I think she was insulted by it whenever someone asked her that. She said,
I think she was insulted by it, but I also think it would be foolish to say there isn't an influence there, because there is. I mean,
she said there's none. She said that for her, she said that if she were to do something like that, it would take a lot of research to play it out, you know.
Oh no, she's definitely not done it deliberately. I'm not saying that she, but there is a clear influence in the fact that she's talking about a people who have been oppressed and had their culture buried.
Yeah.
Very deliberately. And I think that's a comparison that's inescapable, in the same way as George and Europe is inescapable. In terms of Realm of the Elderlings, I think there's it's almost clannish, some of the behavior and rulership things that you see, which make me think of coastal areas in Europe, where I'm thinking like Wales or Portugal or some of the westernmost areas of Europe.
Yeah.
Where you're still very high on the globe, so your winters are harsh and your seasonal changes are very obvious.
Mm-hmm.
And so the need to be prepared, the need to control your resources is so very important. That's where it rings true for me, but I don't think there's ever necessarily any direct parallels, because it is so intimately about character, rather than a world. But AJ Parker has written dozens of books based on Byzantine history. GGK, you come up.
Yeah, I think people try to discredit people far too much with like the historical tie-ins, to be honest.
Yeah.
Like I don't think it's that big of a gotcha. I've had people say that like Ken Liu, Dandelion Dynasty being based on Chinese history, but people are like, he literally just plagiarized it. I'm like, you guys are so dumb.
I never have a problem with authors leaping off from a point of our own history, because that is what drives so much storytelling in humans in general.
Yeah, there's also just a craft on how you approach it and how you write it that has to matter there. Like not everyone, they try to strip away all of the achievement of the work because of this, and it's a failure of criticism, in my opinion.
It's like, that's not what you need to be looking at here. And writers, and hey, being part of the Song of Ice and Fire fandom, what if is a major part of it, because how many points, I mean, you're in a public space talking about a Song of Ice and Fire. How many times have you had the questions, well, what would have happened if this? And there are so many moments in a Song of Ice and Fire that have critical moments that would have shifted the story entirely. And any author at any point of being given the same set of history points could have gone in any different direction.
Yeah.
So of course the writing is important. Of course, making those decisions for those points in time of their story are important, because that's what creates the story, literally, because if something else had happened in that moment, we wouldn't have the story that we have. It doesn't stop us going, oh, wouldn't it have been great if, you know?
Yeah. Right.
It would have.
Yeah, you can see how many interesting ways the stories could have gone.
Yeah.
I mean, like if Ned is around in book 2, 3, 4, and 5, it's a totally different story.
A very different story.
Or if you know, there's a lot of characters, you know, if they had stuck around, probably would have changed things quite a bit.
Even as simple, or I say simple, even as quietly critical a moment as where Sansa's direwolf is taken. And that seems like a really inconsequential thing. But the further into the story you go, you realize just how important that was. And if that hadn't happened, how would that have changed the arc of everything? Like, a lot.
Yeah, Sansa Stark especially. Do you think that like, how do you think Malta and Sansa compare? Because those are two characters I think about a lot.
They're both spoiled. They're both spoiled little princesses.
Yeah.
I think the difference is in that Ned cares that Sansa is happy. Kyle doesn't give a shit if Malta is happy. Kyle wants Malta to marry somebody rich so that he can benefit from it.
Yeah.
He doesn't care about the type of person she marries.
Yeah, quite a difference in
fathers. About Sansa, and he's prepared to turn down Joffrey. You know, there is a point at which he says to her, I will find you someone else. You know, because we've got to know this kid now, and not a fan.
He's just misunderstood.
Kyle wouldn't give a shit. And so Sansa and Malta come from very different places. Malta only sees entitlement. Sansa understands that ruling is a burden.
I don't know if she does it first. I think she comes to understand that because
and it's within her to understand that.
Yeah. I mean, her dad is a great example for her to lead by, but you definitely get I am sick of where I live. My parents are the worst. They're keeping me. You get that vibe that every, kids do.
Teenage girl thing. It really is. So many women that I talk to are like, I see some of myself in Malta or Sansa. We've all gone, oh, I just don't get it.
Well, their expectations are all off, and you see
Yeah.
this with who's Malta's boy toy? I can't remember his name. Help me out.
Rain, who she ends up
Rain,
with.
right?
Yeah.
Yes. So you have Rain, and then obviously Sansa thinks that Joffrey would be the perfect guy or whatever, but in reality, she keeps finding herself thinking about the scarred brother of the Mountain, the Hound.
Yeah.
Who is not a real knight by anyone's accord, but he's maybe acting more knightly.
Than who have been knighted. And I love what George does with that, where you get the Mountain and him being everything a knight isn't, getting rewarded with knighthood.
Yes.
And Sandor going, I'm not going to be that. And in not being his brother is so much more knightly. And yet it's that fact truth thing again. The fact of the matter is somebody with appalling tendencies is a knight. The truth of it is that's the exception, or should be. And in fighting it, he has become the knight he doesn't want to be.
Yeah.
Because his understanding of what a knight is backward.
Yeah. And Sansa is learning these things. Like she's learning the difference between a fact and truth, for sure.
Yeah, she really is.
Yeah.
You know, that what outward appearance isn't real. That's not who the person is.
The fairy tales weren't accurate. Is the
fairy tales?
She's learning.
The fairy tales blame the victim, and whoever wins was the hero at the beginning.
Yeah.
And she is learning that, much to her dismay. But I do find it quite funny. There's I watch a number of reactors on telly and on YouTube, and there's not very many people who obviously haven't ever seen Game of Thrones nowadays, but every now and then I'll find one. And what's really interesting is watching people react to the adaptation and Sansa. She really annoys people. She really annoys them. And everybody loves Arya. But then Bookborn said it not long ago. How much of that is because Arya fulfills the trope and Sansa doesn't?
Yeah.
They're both going to be key elements in the story. But because Sansa stays in the traditional role of princess, somehow she's not powerful. She's not fighting as hard.
Right.
And yet as readers, we know she is. As readers, we know how hard she's hanging on.
Yeah, she's not getting lessons as the cat of the canals, but she is getting lessons from the person who has helped ruin her life, which is Peter Baelish, which is all gonna, eventually come around because the veil is just a big mask anyways for everyone that's there. And I think Sansa will be far better off in the books than she was in the TV show. That's actually one of the things I really hate about the television show is what they did with Sansa and Ramsay.
I didn't like that. I didn't like them.
Yeah, and actually, it's funny.
Storylines, I didn't like that at all.
I've gotten arguments with people who attribute that to the books, and I'm like, that's not in the books.
Yes,
it is.
No,
like, no, it's not. And I have stifled many. I have stifled many an argument that way because people really conflate those two things between the book and the show, and it's totally different. Poor Jane Poole, totally different though.
And that's something I've spoken to other people about. Actually, is the difference in the show and the books. I have a young friend of mine. She's only seen the TV show, and she's like, I am going to read the books, but she's going through an apprenticeship at the moment, doesn't have time. And she said, because I'm not looking forward to that point of the story. And I've gone, okay, we never, ever in the books are in that chamber. We only get the mental state afterward. And I'm talking Reek.
Yes.
It's a very different approach to the point in the story. Because in a book, being inside the head works. You can genuinely understand what that character has gone through because of how broken you're reading. You're reading his brokenness. You can't do that in a TV show. You've got to show him being broken. And that's a very different kind of interaction with the story.
Yeah, and also, I mean, the show is after the the surprise and the shock value, like that. And I'm not against that necessarily, but it was more so just
any other way to show us.
Core to the characters, right? I think that the television show is far more grotesque than the books. I think it's much worse.
I think it's gratuitous in the way it plays out in the show. I do think that it was necessary in terms of having to have at least a scene to show the depth that we're descended to.
Yeah.
But it didn't need to be an ongoing thing necessarily.
Yeah.
Because there isn't any other way to really portray how broken that character becomes without showing him being broken. Because you can get it, as I said, you can get it from reading what's in his mind when you're reading what's in his mind. But I don't know that any actor, no matter how brilliant, could portray just that if you didn't have some kind of scene to tell you something.
Well, that's the power of visual storytelling, right? Like they're reflecting their ability with prose. I think you have a different, way more
at your
disposal. Though I'm sure there's someone out there who would argue that film could also accomplish that without showing it somehow. But like, my point is, I think the show wanted to. I think Dan and Dave wanted to do it.
Deliberate choice.
I think they loved it. Yeah, I think they liked.
There was a lot of the choice there, and it does deserve to be called torture porn because it was gratuitous, it was unnecessary, and there for shock value. That's why I say, in some way, they needed to have shown that, but not that way.
Yeah, I mean, for me, the Sansa stuff just kind of goes against her whole. I think her arc's far more interesting in the.
Her arc does not need that, and hey, knock on wood, hopefully never needs it. I can't see George falling into that trap myself. Sansa is already being forged, by having to learn to see beyond people's faces and question motivations and start to see beyond what she can see.
Yeah.
Like, it's more than just this. You actually have to think beyond and go, what are people after?
Yeah.
Why? And for all as much as I hate Peter, like, he is so creepy. He literally makes my skin crawl on the page. He's actually teaching her a lot because he makes her think it through for herself. He doesn't just state, I've done this to do that. He goes, okay, so what happened there? And he makes her think it out for herself, and she gets there in the end, and she's getting faster.
Yeah.
And I think that she's going to be a real power player.
Yeah, big case of Stockholm syndrome with Peter.
I think she knows he's creepy. She knows.
Oh, yeah. She's very aware.
But
yeah.
She's very cleverly hiding, a bit like Arya. She's hiding Sansa now. She has a different name. She's gone, I don't have to be Sansa. And this character can deal with that.
Mm-hmm.
And so many people who have been through trauma of varying kinds can go, yeah, I totally get that.
Yeah. Who do you hate more, Rhaegar or Peter?
Peter. Because Peter gives me the creeps.
Mm-hmm.
Rhaegar's awful, don't get me wrong. But he has, I kind of get his reasons. Peter just gives, like, from the moment he meets Sansa, I'm like, ooh, get him away. Ooh.
Yeah.
And so many people don't pick up on it. It's astonishing. But no, no.
Yeah.
I literally,
Peter's pretty grotesque.
He's pretty so horrible. And I'm dreading that it will come to that, because I do feel that's going to go nasty. And I don't want to read that. I mean, I will, but I don't want to. It's like, because I'm pretty sure Sansa will be able to do something about it. I do have a question about Sansa.
Okay.
And a little bit to do with her having lost Lady, and George having said publicly that all of the children are wargs. They all have the potential for wargs. Does she have a connection with the Hound?
Well, that's one of the big examples of unreliable narrator, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because she remembers the Hound kissing her, but it never happened.
No, the kiss that never happened. Yeah.
Yeah, I do. I think there's a connection there of some sort. I think that they'll reunite at some point because I don't believe the Hound's dead personally.
No.
So yes, but that's one of the very big mysteries is like I don't know how that plays out. Like that is a very tough thing to get those two back into a situation where they would connect. But maybe it's not as crazy as I think. You know, who knows? Especially if there's some battles. People are gonna have to come together. But yeah, I do. I think Sansa and Hound are extremely important for each other's arcs.
Yeah, I do. I do feel that. And somebody pointed out in a chat, I can't even remember what stream I was watching, but somebody in the chat was talking, and they pointed out that the Hound, however nasty he gets to Arya, is never like that with Sansa.
No.
Never. He's always very gently spoken around her, and he's always sort of there with a hanky. You know, he's there to comfort in as much as somebody as brutish as he can. And I wonder how much of that is Sansa reaching out for something to protect her the way Lady did. And it's one of those instincts as a reader. You're like, there's a tie there. There's something there. And I do wonder if it ties into her warging ability. So.
Yeah, it's definitely possible. I think one of the reasons why Arya is treated worse is because Arya is really annoying and combative. like she's just mean as shit. And I think I'm just like, what are you talking about, little?
Like, you are this tiny thing.
Yeah,
you
like Arya's just going off,
little girl.
Yeah.
I have to say, I do enjoy Arya, but I find her probably the tropiest of all the characters. You know, this
I could see
not like other girls. You know, she's
tomboy. Yeah, I could see that.
And that's not to take away her power. I mean, she's going through a really impressive story arc, which is again a shame that we lost so much nuance in the show as they started to move beyond the source material, which is a real shame because her story is much more nuanced than we got in what we got. There's something far more satisfying in what we get to read from Arya. You see her tuck herself away inside and go, okay, sure, I can do that.
Yeah.
And yet there's a part of her inside that's going, that'll have to do for now. Later. Yeah. I'll move beyond this later. Yeah. And then she's a very staunch core to Arya. In fact, I say that she's probably more similar to Malta than Sansa. And just in her inherent toughness. Because Malta's tough.
Yeah, I can see that. I think Sansa's tough too, though, in her own way.
Yeah, in her own way. And that's why I find her far more fascinating. Because she's written so very differently to almost every other female I've ever seen written in fantasy.
Yeah, Arya's a pretty key component.
Using courtesy as a shield.
Yeah, I think that Arya is a pretty key component in the series being fantasy because, I mean, you have like a 9-year-old assassin, right? Like that is very fantasy-esque. And, I do think
George use that so beautifully.
Yeah, George does a really nice job of exploring what it would be like for a 9-year-old girl who's in a city she doesn't know to become an assassin. Like, it's very troubling.
What has she got to find out? And how does she have to operate?
Yeah, and House Black and White is one of the weirdest things in the series. Like the whole Faceless Men thing is bizarre.
It is bizarre, and we're still learning about them, and that's the kind of joyous thing. Is there's clearly far more happening there. The fact that when she travels to Braavos with the coin, that the lengths the people around her go to give her their name, and later we see. When she's serving at table and the actual Faceless Men are taking on a contract, they go around the table and all of them are like, I can't because I know them. And I'm thinking, okay, so how commonly known are these coins that somebody's received a coin and gone, oh, okay, that means you're one of the Faceless people. If you know my name, you won't kill me. How common is that knowledge? It really struck me. It's like, that seems just such an odd thing. But
I mean, also they have a ton of money. They have a ton of money.
Oh, they are so tied into the bank.
Yeah.
They can't not be.
Well, also they just charge so much money that they can barely afford one assassination in Westeros, like whenever they're talking about.
I wonder how Peter knew how much that cost.
It's weird. Very, very strange, isn't it?
Almost like he's had a quote in the past.
Yeah, possibly. And then,
yeah.
I mean, just like the monetary importance of like, or the limits that it puts on people, it's kind of crazy because then we have Euron, who is able to afford a faceless man to most likely kill his brother.
Yeah.
So where did Euron get this money? See, by just setting up the faceless man.
He did throw a dragon egg off a bridge. So
supposedly, who knows?
Yeah. So, and again, we come back to George's writing is incredibly clever. Because you can link up little throwaway lines and go, if you look at it this way, then it's this. It could be nothing, but could also mean that.
Yes.
Until we get confirmed one way or the other, could be that. And I'm okay with them never being confirmed.
Schrodinger's Westeros, where,
pretty much.
Be one
like
thing,
that,
the same.
Yeah. Even conversation between Sansa and Cersei is so mundanely dark.
Oh, yeah.
Cersei is one of my favorite POV characters.
Mm-hmm.
It seems really strange to say because I don't like Cersei. I think she's an awful person. But her brain is such a bonkers place to be.
Oh, it's amazing.
The
POVs
never where she
from her are just the best. They're the absolute best.
You get so much information from her head, even though she has no idea what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
She's bonkers. I have no other word to describe her.
They're sewing my dresses tighter.
Yeah, it's like, honey, you've been drinking like a fish for months. You are putting on weight.
So good.
And yet I don't think that she's pregnant.
No, I don't think so.
But I do think there's something happening because there is a scene where we see the Maester leaving and saying, I can sort that out for you. So something's happening there. And she's very much in denial, I think, that she's becoming of an age where her metabolism is slowing down, things are starting to be more attractive to gravity, and she's drinking an awful lot. She isn't the most beautiful woman in Westeros anymore. She's becoming the evil queen, the evil stepmother.
Moon Boy thinks so. Moon Boy's just in there clapping them cheeks in the Red Keep. That's crazy.
Oh yeah, yes.
Oh, Moon Boy.
Yeah.
Who would have thought?
There's one of the significant moments that they changed in the adaptation, and I kind of get why, because there was an element to Tyrion's backstory that was just a lot to go into, and they've kind of brushed over it, where Jaime frees Tyrion and they have their little conflab before he goes to kill. And
the show.
It goes very differently in the books.
Yeah. Massive mistake on the show's part.
Huge. It just changes that dynamic too much to believe from that point on. And it was such a tragedy for me because Jaime sees this as a moment to heal a lot of problems. And Tyrion is so badly hurt by it that this person who I trust more than anybody did this to me.
Mm-hmm. He just wants to hurt him in that moment.
And so that lashing back, which, let's face it, had a core of truth to it, that he's just stretched a bit, does seemingly no damage to Jaime. And it worms its way into Jaime over the next book and a half. Mm-hmm. And you see it poisoning Jaime's thinking because he starts to see the truth. So this lie, this nastiness that came from Tyrion actually transforms Jaime in quite a good way in that he starts to see the reality of some of the people around him. Because a bit like Sansa, Jaime has believed in the fairy tale for a long time. That it's all what it looks like on the surface, and I fixed the problem when I killed the Mad King. yes, Robert's an asshole, but that's okay because these people love me and I'm this. And he starts to recognize that actually they have been using me my whole life.
Yeah, I mean, and he's always that ends with Tywin from the very get-go about like what they want for, what they want for his life. But I will say I think the Tyrion and Jaime conversation is very Hobb-esque. Like
Yes.
a lot of Hobb's
So
best moments are the difficult conversations you have to have in your life.
Yeah.
And sometimes, with Fitz, he would just say the wrong thing because he was being petty or vengeful.
Yeah.
And that is certainly the case.
Lashing out in the moment. And
that's certainly the case with Tyrion, right? Tyrion just wants to hurt Jaime in that moment.
Understandable hurting of somebody else.
Yeah, and sets a trajectory for both of their characters. And if they were ever to be brought back together, it would be. It's a totally different story.
Yes,
because of that.
I mean, if we do see them back together, we're not going to get this lovely, pleasant chat in the underside of the Red Keep. No, that is not how that conversation is going to go. Mm-hmm. It's just not. And the reality for both of them in that this person that they should be able to trust, Tyrion has that taken away from Jaime. This only person who's ever been good to him. Mm-hmm. He has that taken away from him. And for Jaime, it's this blindfold around Cersei that suddenly he sees her for what she is. So he has that one person that is part of him shown for what she really is. And that destroys one of the basic relationships of his life. The changes it puts in both of them is really quite dark. And George does a fantastic job of showing it.
Yeah, and they also they begin to cross at the x-axis, and then they both
they kind of take on each other's.
Tyrion becomes a villain, and Jaime starts to become a hero. He's out there doing diplomatic work in the Riverlands and trying to save, parts through this post-Civil War era, whereas Tyrion is on a drunken, vengeful stupor and is abusing people around him and doing horrible things.
He is.
So they end up, kind of flipping.
They do. And again, we come back to this fact-truth thing again, because Jaime's out there doing good things, and we know that because we're in his head. But the people outside of Jaime's head are seeing him making threats that are so revolting. Mm-hmm. He threatens to fling somebody's child with a catapult.
Yep.
That's a horrendous thing to threaten. And he knows in his head it's not something he would ever do. He's like, well, I wouldn't do that. But what would they do? They would do that. And in doing that, he's presenting himself as the villain that people have always thought he was. But we know as readers that he's made this fundamental change that nobody can see. So factually, he's still this horrible person that deserves the name Kingslayer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it makes you wonder if Jaime in A Feast for Crows would still push a kid out of a tower or not.
See, I don't think he would.
Yeah, I would lean towards no, but I'm not sure.
I genuinely don't think he would. And I think the fact that they attached the line, the things I do for love, because that is a line that comes across, is this is done to protect Cersei. Mm-hmm. I don't think at any point was that about protecting himself. That was about protecting her. And that's not something he would do in Feast anymore. I think he would be more like, well, she brought that on herself. So, too bad.
Well, yeah, and we see the letter she sends and he throws it in the fire. And
I cheered when that happened. The first time I read that, I literally cheered. I got such a strange look from the cat. Sitting in the silence here, reading my book, and all of a sudden, yes! And the cat was like...
there's like a fluctuation of like hero to villain depending on the moments, and in some ways Fitz can be a bit of a villain at times. He can do things that are really frustrating or missteps,
and things where and this is the it's the facts truth thing again. It's what do you know at the time, and at the time the truth of the event is one thing, but the fact is something very different. And I mean, he kills at one point an entire troop of soldiers. including their servants, who he knows are innocent.
Yep.
But that's the only way he can escape the situation. And he does what's necessary. And he hates himself for it. But he still does it.
Yeah.
You know, and he's still, the horror stories that are being told about him are all at heart true. He does go berserk in battle. And yes, he will bite out the throats of people. But he goes berserk in battle, and he does.
Yes, he certainly does. Yeah. So I mean, there's no
getting around that.
Yeah, so Fitz isn't just always the hero we're cheering for. I mean, there are times wherever I'm like almost actively
places.
Yeah, I'm almost actively disappointed in Fitz. I'm
quite often sad with.
Yeah, and I'm very disappointed in Tyrion. In A Dance with Dragons. Very, 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 very disappointed with him. And makes you, I don't know. I think it makes you a little bit fonder of the character. Maybe not fonder is the word, but like closely attached to the characters.
I think being able to see them make mistakes, to see them reach incorrect conclusions based on what they know, makes them people. That's the secret, I think, that both Robin Hobb and George R. R. Martin have, and that by making their characters people, by making them flawed, they're making them more reachable to the reader.
Yeah,
they're familiar. They're people you can identify with. Something about almost everybody will talk to you in some way. Even Walder Frey at times, I understand him because I only have 2 children. And there were days where I'm like, oh my God. Oh. He has literal dozens of children. Of course he's going to get fed up with them arguing.
Yeah, I don't know where he got Viagra at, but he figured it out. I don't know.
It's super fertile. And however gross that is. But I get it. I get it. I get that he's like, oh crap. Okay, if I back any one of these kids, I'm going to cause a civil war in my own country. I can't back any of them. I have to let them battle between themselves, because if I get involved, well, that's a problem. And yet his non-involvement pisses everybody off.
Because he also does get slighted quite a bit.
He does. And because they're new money, the phrase. And I mean, what is that what is that in American? A carpetbagger? I don't know.
I think the phrase will be extinct by the end of A Song of Ice and Fire. I don't think there'll be a single Frey left.
Here's hoping.
I actually think that house will literally disappear.
Well, the gods don't like somebody who breaches guest right.
Yes.
And George did a really clever thing there, because we get that chapter from Bran just as the Red Wedding is going on, where we get the story of the rat cook. There's far more though to happen there, because you've got, the plotting that happens, and that's just so wonderfully done, because the first time you read the books, you don't see it. You don't see the plot. You don't see it coming together. And yet when you know what happens at the Red Wedding and you reread, you're like, oh my God, how did I not see it?
Yeah, it's very logical.
There.
Yeah.
And
the way that it comes together is very obvious.
It is. And you're just so not looking for it when you're reading the first time. But to see the involvement of the Lannisters and the Boltons and the way that things get misconstrued. Jamie saying the Lannisters send their regards was in no way a threat or a malignant expression. That was him just basically saying, okay, I know you're on my side now. Okay. But for Bolton to say that during the Red Wedding gives that sentence such a different meaning.
So it's also interesting because isn't it Jaime Lannister sends his regards or something like that, right? Isn't it Jaime?
Yeah,
which is weird that they would put that on Jaime.
I send my regards.
Yeah, Jaime Lannister sends his regards, and then dead.
And how much of that is Roose deflecting? Just forget the Boltons were even involved. Because he is disturbing.
Yeah, and Bolton has an interaction with Jaime, right? Whenever he's with Brienne. So it all kind of ties together in a very
it really does.
obvious way.
So Jaime and Roose Bolton have a brilliant conversation. George is so good at dialogue. They have a brilliant conversation at dinner with Brienne, where they're all having the same conversation, but Roose and Jaime are having a very different conversation. Jaime are telling each other, okay, I'm on your side now, and Roose is saying, but I can't show anyone yet, so shush. Brienne doesn't hear any of that conversation. As a reader, you don't either until you reread. And then you go, oh my God, okay, that meant something completely different.
Yeah.
The context, the awareness of potential happenings just changes what you're reading. And I reread a lot, and not a lot of readers can give you that. It's surprisingly rare to find a book that gives you this value on a reread. And A Song of Ice and Fire has it in spades.
Yeah, it does. And you're talking about context and stuff, but like even how the context within the series itself, like in canon works, is really interesting, because Realm of the Elderlings, this is something I see a lot of people complain about, is like we will find out something, but characters do not know it for 300 pages, and then like we're just waiting for them to get this news. And there's a sense of like trepidation with some of it, like because it's really bad news. Like for instance, when Fitz is worried about is not aware that someone close to him is in danger. And for like a long time, for
a big ass chunk of a book.
Yeah, like and
you're just waiting for the other shoe to drop, and you're like, oh.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. And A Song of Ice and Fire does this all the time as well. Like the way information travels in Westeros is very important to how the things develop. For instance, Daenerys finding out King Robert's dead like halfway through Clash of Kings, like 6 months after it happened.
Yeah. Like so long after it happens. But you also see that game of telephone happening where, because it's that interpretation of events, mouth to mouth, rumors, where by the time word of what's happening in Essos gets to King's Landing and Old Town, it's such garbled versions of the stories that you can see the kernel of truth in them. And you understand why the maesters are poo-pooing it, going, oh, whatever. Because what they get is so blatantly impossible. Like, that is not what's happening. And they're right. That's not what's happening, except it is what's happening skewed slightly.
Yeah. You can even also trace, like, for instance, the phrase and everything that happens with them actually is very easy to spot if you pay attention to background dialogue in some of the chapters of like like something someone overheard, like Arya or like a Frey walking by and they're like, we got to go. And it's like, oh, where are you going? And again, this is happening like way after. There's really good examples of this between Clash of Kings and A Storm of Swords, about halfway through with Arya. And when Arya is learning things, like the first time
Harrenhal, she learns so much stuff that she doesn't even know she's learned.
Yeah. And there's a lot of whisperings and ravens going out. You can actually put together the Red Wedding through Arya's POVs. She's the first POV you can figure out what's happening, which is really cool.
Tells you on the reread. Oh, it was planned this early. And so good. So good. So good. Because George does it very differently to Rob and Hob, in that it's usually very clear that there's information that has or hasn't got through. George gives us, as you say, it's people in the background, it's snippets of conversation, it's things that out of context don't mean the same thing. Arya and Harrenhal, she's talking to a squire and he's beside himself because he's not going to marry a princess.
Yes. And you're like, wait, what?
Like, hang on. You know, as the reader, that, hang on, if that's that, he's talking about Arya. She doesn't know he's talking about Arya. He has no idea he's talking to Arya.
Yeah.
And it gives you so much information that nobody in the scene understands. Which is a skill. I just boggles the mind that he's able to give you so much information
Mm-hmm.
in a scene that isn't about giving you any information.
Yeah, I think the subsequential chapters also matter a lot, and you realize that if you do like we do a chapter a week at Bend the Knee, and you realize very quickly that there's a reason why they're placed where they are. But I think that's something Realm of the Elderlings does too. Like that's a shared trope, right? Is like the miscommunication or the withheld information, like haven't found out yet, kind of waiting.
The difference, I think, there is George is able to do it with such finesse in the way he establishes a theme or
less on the nose
piece of lore, but also quite clearly. I mean, like I said, the Red Wedding and Bran's chapter with the rat cook, those are very clearly connected. Whereas something that happened in chapter, I think, 6 or 7 in Assassin's Apprentice, you don't get any meaning for until halfway through Assassin's Quest, book 15, where something that happens to Fitz, he gets sort of given a name, just kind of, there you go, I'm going to call you that, really offends him. He's like, the stable master puts more thought into naming a horse.
Yeah.
You know, like he's genuinely offended by the way that he's given this name. Only the majority of his life later, finding the letter that gives him context, that says he was always being known by that name because that was the code name they had to talk about him. And it hit me like a freaking freight train. And I'm thinking, if I was Fitz in that moment, I'd have just sat on my knees and cried. Because he was so hurt by it in that moment that if he'd had any understanding of the background to that name, he would have cuddled that woman.
Yeah.
And that lack of context, that miscommunication based around literally one word, defined him in such a way where he felt isolated and unloved and nobody for the majority of his life. And he just took it completely out of context.
Yeah.
You know, that lack of information that is that people operate on. And it's true to life. You know, if you don't have all the facts, you're going to have the wrong decision-making process. And yeah, they both do it so well.
Yeah, they definitely like playing with the idea that you don't have the full picture.
Yeah. And if you don't have the full picture, you're going to get it wrong. I mean, you just are. You're going to get it wrong. And and history shows us that, in that now that we're in this, you know, everybody can contact anybody I mean, I'm in New Zealand. Hello.
Yes,
I can talk to you in real time halfway across the world. There isn't that lag in information. If I want to know something, I can find out. So judgment on decision making is fairer now because, well, you could have found out. Whereas before that was possible, there has to be an element of, well, you didn't know any better. You didn't have all the facts, you know.
Yeah.
And to make your decisions knowing you don't have all the facts.
Yeah, I think though it never bothered me. Like a lot of people do get bothered by like one character, like us knowing the information, then waiting for the character to find out. Like a lot of people are bothered by that mechanism. It does not bother me at all. Never has.
I'm
really
never bothered by that. Because part of that, well, with good writing, let's face it, because it can be done badly. But with good writing, it's done in a way to show you something about the characters. How are they behaving without that knowledge? And how does that change when they get the knowledge?
Yeah.
You know, what decisions have they made before the knowledge that they have to undo? What damage does that cause? What decisions did they make that they can't undo? And what damage does that cause? And the way George and Robin Hobb work with that is just adds on to the pile of what makes these people so fascinating to read.
Yeah, I think it might be more of a possibly a modern reader problem, where once they have the information, it's the what's next? What happened next? What happened next? What happened next? Which a lot of books, especially in the fantasy genre, are written like that. And I think that it kind of, you know, frustrates people.
There's definitely a rush.
Because I have found out what happened. Now I need them to happen. Like, I want to know what happens next instead of thinking about the implications of this. I would imagine that is probably what's going on there.
I think AP put it beautifully quite a long time ago. He said, the first time you read a story, you're chasing the plot. You want to know with an expert. You want to know what happens next. And so you're not noticing what else is happening. Whereas on a reread, you know what happens next. So you can pay attention to each scene as you're given it.
Yeah.
And that is absolutely the fact when I reread. I very much see it as taking the scenic route, because I have time to stop and look around and see what else is happening. And that's when you do pay attention to the asides, to the conversations happening that aren't critical to the moment. And there's often so much information in those parts of the story where when people say, oh, A Song of Ice and Fire is bloated, I'm like, no, you can't get rid of any of that. All of it is important. You just don't know that yet.
When people, I've had books where I was like, I wish this was a little bit shorter. Like, I'm not going to lie, but I rarely ever say it because it's a very arrogant thing to say, in my opinion. Well, you could easily cut 500 out of this 600-page book. It's like, I guess, but like, go ahead. Also, in a series, you don't know what's coming next.
If you haven't finished the series, you don't know how much of what you read was important. And that's often the case, I find, for people who are reading Realm of the Elderlings when they struggle through Assassin's Quest. I didn't mind the length of that book. I loved it because I'm there for the scenery. I really enjoyed the time that book took to get where it was going. A lot of people struggle with it. And, we didn't need all of those pages. You kind of did, because you got more information in those pages than you realized. You don't know how much you now know, and you won't until the payoff. And when the payoff comes, you're going to be astonished by how much of that you already knew.
Yeah. I don't blame people for not caring about certain things, but it's more so taking it one step further to saying, like, I know how to make this book better for everyone. When in reality, it's like, I wish this book could be 300 pages shorter for me.
Yeah.
Right. Like, that's the difference.
Well, George does it, doesn't he? I mean, George is, you could take the story and say, okay, they were born, they caused a rebellion, they became king, and they got killed by a pig. That's the key elements of the story. What more do you need?
Yeah.
So at what point do you stop? At what point have you got it so story only that you don't need any more?
Right. Yeah.
Part of why I read fantasy is for the richness. It's for that wealth of world.
Yeah. Wealth of world's a good way to put it.
That's kind of the point. And a good writer doesn't make me feel like I'm wading through freaking waist-deep muck. It feels just like a lovely day out in the country, just taking in sights. And that is something that bothers me a lot when people, you could get rid of a few hundred pages of that.
And
show me the last book you wrote, mate.
Yeah, I like the wealth of world is a good way to put it. I'm reading I'm about to finish up Witchwood Crown by Tad Williams, and it's very methodical, very slow burn. And I'm just thinking in my head, I've enjoyed it a lot, but I'm like, man, a lot of people ain't gonna make it through this. A lot of people aren't gonna be able to handle this because that's not how it is, anymore.
Yeah. And that is very much it is very much a generational thing. I mean, I notice it. Hey, I'm 50 today. I'm allowed to say so. I'm older than most people on Booktube. And books now, and I sound like the old guy on the lawn, get off my lawn, but books now, they don't have any lushness to them. They're very streamlined, which, okay, great. You're getting a great story. But where is the just soak in the pleasure of that?
Well, Derry, I have to read 25 books this month to reach my bookathon goals, and then
25. Okay, well, I can recommend some short old ones.
Yeah, I think people are more worried about completing books than reading them.
Yeah, and I don't think that's the point myself. I really don't. The point is for me, it's to relish the writing that somebody has created, and George has done it just beautifully. The fact that I can reread these chonkers so many times is Oh, actually, that's a very good point, Evie. That'll do you for your book readathon. Read a lot of Discord. There's just something so incredibly satisfying with reading a really well-written, lush fantasy world. It's like eating a roast dinner as opposed to McDonald's. Like, they're both meals.
Yeah, I feel as if there's still sections of the books of any series probably I reread that I dread a little bit, but like I've never been like, I wish this entire section was gone. If I enjoyed it, of course.
Yes.
This is how things last, right? Is the fact that they're rereadable, because most consumers are not buying 30 books a month, like a lot of us do, but they do read something, and then that's what they read, and they read it over and over and over again. So the ones that can last under the limelight for a long period of time through many different eyes are the ones that usually, I think, stick around. And I think that Realm of the Elderlings and A Song of Ice and Fire will be around in 50 years, 100 years, to varying levels of popularity, right? Because like A Song of Ice and Fire, it has a TV show, so obviously it's more popular.
Stick around for a while.
But in the fantasy genre, like it'll stick around.
I mean, it will have an expiry date. Both of these series will have an expiry date, at which point they will become classics that only true fantasy experts will read. We're seeing that already with Lord of the Rings, where there's still a lot of us around who read that for love, but quite a lot of new fantasy readers read it and go, oh my God, that was boring. Because it's just very old. It's old school. The language is different.
Tolkien really liked his trees.
Very different. Hey, I'm guilty of it. I skip almost all the songs. I skip almost all the poems. I have been known to skim very, very.
Wait, you don't like walking? There's a lot of walking.
I've literally spoken to my book in the past and gone, I know what a tree looks like. Next page. So, and I've never been backward telling people, do you know what? Watch the movies. If you liked the movies, read the books. But you don't have to read the books first. The movies will give you the spirit of those books.
Some people would disagree with that. Some people get really mad.
I'm not saying they're a good adaptation of the books. I'm saying they give you the spirit of the books. And I defy anyone to argue me on that point, because they get the spirit of the books exactly right.
Yeah, I like the movies quite a bit, honestly. Probably more than the book.
Oh, the movies are stunning. Hey, I live in New Zealand. I'm contractually obligated to. So, I mean, I do love them, but the level of passion for those films was evident for everybody that worked on them, and it just shows on the screen. Like, you look at it even now, this many years later, and they're still breathtaking.
Mm-hmm.
And they do get the spirit right. And I mean, so many people talk about adaptations, and we know we've had trouble with Game of Thrones, and yet House of the Dragon, for all of the changes, and there have been considerable, is nailing it, in my opinion. I am so excited for the weekend, like so excited.
I am very, very excited.
I have popcorn, and I have booze, and I have lots of snacks, and I'm literally just going to sit in front of a screen all day Saturday watching all of season 1 again, so that I'm ready.
Yeah, there's very few things that get me happy or hyped up anymore. So for me, this is definitely the highlight of my year.
Oh yeah, I'm so excited. Like, I'm like, oh, because I'm pretty sure I know what's going to happen in that first episode, and
it'll be a moment. It's
going to be a moment. Mm-hmm. So I am very excited, because I do think they're doing an amazing job with the adaptation. And people will go, well, which of Hobbs' works could they adapt? And I'm like, well, none of them, because they spend so much time in people's heads, and they're so intimate stories.
Yeah, I don't want to see it.
Live ships, but
yeah, I wouldn't mind seeing live ships adapted. I think that you could
get the ships right.
Yeah, you
and that could go wrong so easily.
Yeah,
bad effects on the ships would kill it, and it would be awful, and I would bleed internally badly if they did that. That I don't want it to be adapted. Like, no.
I think I could see live ships being adapted. I don't think I really want to see any of the Fitz stuff to be adapted.
I don't think it would translate.
I don't really like TV. though, so I'm a weirdo
I
in
don't
that
watch
regard.
TV.
I like reading.
But when I do find something, I watch it for age. I'll watch it till it's ridiculous.
Are you a rewatcher too?
Yes.
Okay.
I've seen Firefly probably 40 times. I've seen Doctor Who, I don't know how many times. Like 15 seasons of Supernatural I have seen.
That's a lot.
Times.
That's a lot.
It's a lot. And I'm really old school with rereads and rewatches. I will watch even the bad episodes. And like I reread Dresden and I will read the first 3. Not always fun, but the Audible is fine. I can do those. But it's very rare I'll pick up a new show, which isn't very fair of me, because how else could programming give me something I like if I don't watch it when they do?
Yeah.
I mean, hey, I tried to give Rings of Power a go. I watched all of the first season. It was beautiful. Like, it looked beautiful, but it wasn't Middle Earth. It was a beautiful, beautiful show, but it didn't have, for me, it didn't feel like a Tolkien world. So not a successful adaptation in my mind. There will be other people who feel differently. Yay! House of the Dragon, nailed it.
Yeah, I wonder, what stuff would be adapted. I don't think Realm of the Elderlings would be on that list, but I could be wrong. It certainly could be. I think the budget would be low, which is different.
I would have to be in charge of it, which would make it far too expensive to run.
I mean, I feel like if there was anyone that could give direction, it would probably be you, to be honest.
Hey, I know what everybody's feeling. No, you have to play that angrier. Yeah. No, you don't know that yet. Chill out. But yeah, but hey, there's definitely fantasy out there that could work. I think Laura here is right. First Law, I think, would work really well as an adaptation. I think anything that's very dialogue-y, that's very physical in terms of storytelling, I think that would work wonderfully. DK Moon, I didn't watch Wheel of Time because I haven't read the books, and I don't really have any intention to. Any series that has that many pages that even its own die-hard fans call a slog, I'm sorry, I'm out.
Hey, there are people who like those books.
But then generally not the ones who are hardcore fans. They're the ones who are like, yeah, it's pretty good. I liked those books.
Mm-hmm.
But, yeah. It's just a worry. I mean, I like all of the Realm of the Elderlings books. There are people who struggle with Assassin's Quest, and I'm like, you're wrong. You're allowed to be wrong, but you're wrong.
Yeah, I don't like Rainwild.
And a lot of people don't. And I struggled for a long time with Rainwild, thinking they were just meh. And yet, the more I have read them, the higher they go in my estimation. They're knocking on 4.5 stars nowadays for me.
Wow.
In terms of, actually, there's more here than you realize.
Yeah, I think I might have undervalued some of it, but like overall, I just don't know if it was for me. But I think
knowing what happened to it publishing-wise helps.
It does.
It makes you more forgiving of some of the flaws because they weren't in Robin Hobb's control. But when you look past those and you go, okay, well, what did I get? I got all of this commentary in terms of social function. I got all of this commentary around bodily autonomy, and I got all of this theme work around society and progression, and I got all of this around the law of this world. And suddenly this becomes a really necessary part of the story that becomes really fundamental and integral to everything that's come before and comes after. But that's the thing, is I was like, fans of Wheel of Time can't sit there and say that to you.
Some do.
They don't. They will sit there and say, hey, look, it was great because you got to explore this and you got to explore that.
No, I know some people who
necessary to the story.
I know some people who believe they are super necessary.
Well, then I need to talk to them because they need to.
They're in my Discord. Fallen Adam is a huge fan of those books.
Really?
And so is Boss.
Really?
Boss as well.
Okay, well, I have spoken to them before. I shall talk to them again because
I'm
I
just
need to
saying
know
they're out
why.
there. They're out there because there's
Hey,
somebody
if
on a
they can
stream.
convince me, I'll give it a go.
There's somebody on a stream out there who says everybody hates Rainwell's Chronicles. There's somebody out there
Yeah,
who says that, and that's not true, right? Like we have a
it
couple
is
in
true.
chat that really love
It
it.
really is.
You have now loved it, right?
I really have. There's just so much more in them than I think people give them credit for. And when you go into it with the expectation of teen angst and teen love triangles, that's what you're going to see. But if you actually read it without that expectation, it's not actually there. What you're getting is people trying to create a world for themselves that, if you're looking for teen angst, looks like teen angst. But it's actually not. But that comes down to, I don't want to be the woman who's sitting here going, read it better. If that's how you read it, then I'm really sorry that that's how you read it. There's more there if you look at it again. But
hey, I've been defending Feast of Crows for many years, so I get it.
Yeah, you have to let it be what it is. You know, AP says it. You're reading against the text.
What is AP?
And I will admit, it was after AP said that I did read Rainwilds without any expectation and let it be itself. And that is when it started to increase in its value to me, because I clearly wanted it to be something it wasn't. But when I let it be its own thing, I was like, actually, this is really good. Like, really good. Feast is the same. Let it be the start of new arcs. Let it be telling you about new situations and new people and new ways this is going to get complicated.
Yeah.
And suddenly it's amazing.
Yeah.
Suddenly these characters are like, oh, they're going to cause such chaos. You know, I'm waiting for these characters to get to King's Landing because I'm like, oh my God, they're going to throw so many wrenches in Cersei's plans. It's going to be fabulous.
I mean, I think Feast is amazing, but there's also people out there who don't understand the way story arcs really work. And I'm not saying that to be diminishing to them, but like in wrestling, we learn on when we're telling the story in our matches that it's very like you cannot
follow the way stories go.
If you walk outside and an elephant is having sex with a giraffe, the first day you see that, you go, "Oh my God, that's insane." The second day you see, you're like, "Man, they're still at it. This is wild." Did anyone get to take a picture of that? Third, fourth, fifth, sixth. Now we're at the seventh day. Oh, they're still at it. Okay, well, moving on. I need to water my garden. You cannot move at 100 miles an hour the entire time. You will burn your audience out pretty easily doing that, and also you'll cheapen your story. There has to be peaks and valleys. It is a natural progression of the way stories unfold, and that's why before in a pro wrestling match, before the finish, going into the big moments towards the ending, you usually get what we call a double down, where both men are on the mats. The good guy has found a way to knock down the bad guy, and they're both on their backs. And now you're building back up. You're building back up. You
need that anticipation. You need
exactly. Yeah, you have to lay the groundwork.
It's a phrase we all know, is that you give yourself nowhere to go, and you have to be able to go, which means after every time you've got somewhere, you have to let it come down again.
Yeah, you have to let it resonate.
So now you can go somewhere.
Yeah,
you have to. And without those moments of everybody reacting, of everybody taking in what just happened, of after the Red Wedding, of after the battle at the wall, of after
it's just hilarious that the guy who did that, the next book, they don't trust him anymore. It's hilarious. It's hilarious.
Exactly. You're like, did you not just read the most amazing thing ever?
The problem is that
book is guy a chance.
That payoff is in Winds of Winter, and we don't have it.
No, and we don't have it yet. But this is the thing that I find with the Rainwilds. You've come off Tawny You've come off the conclusion of what was going to be the conclusion of everything. So that's the biggest peak you were ever going to get. That was the ending. And now she has to give you an entirely new arc. So, okay, now we have to bring in some new people. We need some new characters. We're going to build up some conflict. We're going to build up some tension.
Yeah.
And you've got to be thinking, if she can do Tawny Man to here, and now there's more, where could that go?
Yeah.
That could go lots of places, but you have to come down from Tawny Man to get there.
Yeah.
You know, that's just how good stories work. You have to have somewhere to go, which means you have to slow down occasionally. Give your readers time to breathe. It can be too intense. How many times do we, hear ourselves saying, "It was so intense, I was exhausted. It was so emotional. You can't read massive books that keep you at that emotional intensity.
Yeah.
It's too exhausting. You can't do it. You can't do it. It's not good for you."
Yeah, I think that kind of like up and down thing is pretty integral to storytelling. Good storytelling.
Yeah. And good writers make it interesting enough that you're prepared to take lower intensity.
Yeah. So, but people just want the next thing. They
really do.
Yeah.
And anyway, I've just looked at the time and we have been going for well over 2 hours. And which I'm quite impressed with. Yay us. And there's plenty of things we haven't touched on. But that's, a story for another day. So is there anything in particular that when I said to you, I want to talk to you about these two series that we haven't touched on?
No, I don't think so. I just think it's, about like when I think about the two series in conjunction, I think about the POV writing, and then I think about the comparisons of certain situations like Fitz and John. But overall, I think it's the burden of duty and how do you go about doing the right thing when nothing feels the right way? Like those tough decisions and tough conversations are definitely the things that draw me to the series. And I think that, especially in Realm of the Elderlings case, has actually like really affected me as a person. So I'm thankful that both of them exist. I'm thankful that they're friends, and I'm thankful that they have the same editor. I think that probably has a big part in this as well. So it's no surprise that I liked Hob after, George has been so complimentary of her, and Hob obviously loves George as well. So it's always cool whenever two of your favorite authors get along. It's pretty cool.
Oh yeah. It would be awful if it was a Star Wars, Star Trek thing where you could only like one. That would be terrible. It would be terrible. So, hey, we're all geeks here. This is a safe space.
Not on my channel. Don't be bringing that Shrek shit. Don't be bringing that over to me.
Jimmy.
Yes.
But this is going to have to be a subject we don't talk about.
Okay, that's fine.
So with that said, all right, thank you so much for joining me. This has made my day. It really has. Thank you so much. I've enjoyed this tremendously.
Me too.
You are linked below. Thank you. You are linked in the description below. Everybody I've seen in the chat, I already know is subscribed to you, because all of these people join me when we're all in the audience for Chatting with Nuts. So they probably don't need to know where to find you. But if anybody finds this and they don't, Jimmy's channel is in the description. And I will also try and find Bend to the Knee and put Bend to the Knee down there as well, because Jimmy talking about A Song of Ice and Fire with Matt is fabulous. And if you're a fan of that series, you should totally be listening to Bend to the Knee. With that, I'm going to love you and leave you. So goodbye, everybody. Ending stream.